It was a calm evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of night where the sounds of crickets filled the air and the streets were almost empty. The Thompson family had just finished dinner, and everyone was beginning to wind down. Jason Thompson, the father, had just finished some work in the garage and was about to relax with his wife, Emily, in front of the television. Their two children, Lily and Max, were brushing their teeth and getting ready for bed. Everything seemed perfectly normal. They had no reason to expect that the night would be anything but peaceful. The kids were excited to finish their schoolwork and go to bed for the night, and Emily was tidying up the kitchen, humming a tune as she did. The atmosphere in the house was calm, cozy, and full of the comfort of family. Jason was just about to lock the back door when something strange caught his eye. Out of the corner of his vision, he noticed movement near the fence. At first he brushed it off. It could be anything, a stray animal or a neighbor walking their dog. But the feeling in his gut told him otherwise. It was the kind of feeling you get when something isn't quite right, even when you can't put your finger on it. The moment he stepped closer to the window, he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. There in the yard was a dog, a large, scruffy mutt with fur matted in patches, looking lost and out of place. Jason squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The dog was pacing back and forth, its ears perked, its eyes scanning the yard as if waiting for something. Jason didn't recognize it, but the dog's behavior was odd. It wasn't a stray in the typical sense. It seemed to have a purpose, and there was something deeply unsettling about the way it was acting. Suddenly, the dog let out a sharp, urgent bark, its body tense with every sound. Jason felt his heart race. The bark was loud and insistent, a cry for help. It wasn't the playful bark of a dog excited to see someone. This bark was desperate. Jason quickly moved away from the window, his instincts kicking in. He needed to figure out what was going on. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Before he could make a decision, the unmistakable sound of footsteps reached his ears. Someone was walking toward the back door. Jason's heart skipped a beat as he quietly moved toward the door. He peeked through the curtains and saw two men walking across the yard, heading straight for the back entrance. They were dressed in dark clothing, and their movements were deliberate, slow, and calculated. Jason immediately understood. They weren't just walking, they were attempting a break-in. Panic set in. Jason quickly ran to the kitchen trying to think of something, anything, that would help protect his family. He knew he had to act fast. Emily and the kids were still in the house, unaware of the danger outside. His mind raced as he thought of calling the police, but he realized that they wouldn't be able to get there in time. He had no choice but to try to confront the intruders himself. As Jason reached for the phone, the barking outside grew louder, more frantic. It wasn't the sound of a random dog anymore. This was the sound of a dog fighting back, trying to protect someone. Jason opened the door cautiously and stepped outside to see what was happening. That's when he saw the dog again, the scruffy mutt that had been pacing around the yard, still barking fiercely at the men. The intruders seemed startled by the dog's sudden appearance, but they didn't retreat. Instead, one of them pulled a crowbar from his jacket and raised it in the direction of the dog. Jason's heart raced even faster. He wasn't sure if the dog was a threat or if it was on his side. But the dog's behavior made it clear. It wasn't backing down. In fact, it lunged at the man with the crowbar, snapping its jaws and growling with ferocity. The dog was determined to protect the house, even if it meant confronting two armed men. The intruders were thrown off guard. They hadn't expected an animal to come after them so aggressively. The man with the crowbar swung at the dog, but the dog dodged, moving with surprising speed. It wasn't just attacking out of fear or anger. It was focused, calculating, and protective. The dog's movements were sharp, precise, as though it understood the stakes. Jason didn't have time to think. He rushed outside, yelling at the men to leave, trying to distract them from the dog. One of the men glanced at Jason, then looked back at the dog. They weren't ready for this fight. The dog's aggression made it clear that they weren't welcome, and after a tense moment, the intruders hesitated. They muttered something under their breath and then, realizing they were outmatched, turned to run. As they fled into the shadows, Jason was left standing in the yard, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that was nothing short of miraculous. A stray dog, a dog he had never seen before, had protected his family from two would-be burglars. The dog hadn't hesitated for a second, even when faced with a dangerous situation. It was as if the dog knew exactly what it needed to do, and did it without question. Jason rushed to the dog, who was now sitting in the middle of the yard, panting heavily but standing proud. It had saved his family. He dropped to his knees beside the dog, still trying to process what had just happened. "You saved us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The dog, still panting, looked up at him with tired eyes, as if satisfied with its actions. It wasn't wagging its tail or acting overly excited, but there was a sense of relief in its posture. It had done its job. Jason stood up and glanced at the house. Emily and the kids had heard the commotion and were now standing at the door, their faces full of confusion and concern. Jason waved them over, beckoning them outside. "It's okay," he called, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "We're safe now." Emily and the children cautiously stepped outside, looking at the dog with wide eyes. Jason explained what had happened, telling them how the dog had chased off the intruders. At first they were in disbelief. How could a stray dog have saved them from such a dangerous situation? But the proof was clear. The dog, still standing proudly in the yard, had earned their trust in a way that words couldn't describe. The police arrived soon after, taking a report about the break-in attempt, but they were just as amazed by the story as Jason and Emily were. The dog was brought inside and Jason gave him some food and water. Emily, still processing everything, knelt down to pet the dog. "What should we do with him?" she asked, her voice soft. Jason looked down at the dog, who had begun to relax now that the danger had passed. "I don't know where he came from, but I think he's meant to stay with us." The dog, seemingly understanding, curled up on the floor beside the family, resting after the chaos of the night. Over the next few days, the Thompsons tried to find out more about the dog. They contacted local shelters and posted on social media, but no one had reported a missing dog that matched his description. It seemed as though he had simply appeared just when they needed him the most. As the days passed, the dog, whom they named Buddy, became a permanent member of the Thompson family. He would follow Jason around the house, always alert and protective, and the family couldn't imagine their lives without him. Buddy had become their hero not just for his bravery, but for the simple, unspoken bond he shared with them. Buddy's actions that night saved the Thompsons from a terrifying situation. And though no one would ever fully understand how or why he had been there when they needed him, the family knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the miracles you need come from the most unexpected places. The Thompsons would always be grateful to Buddy, the stray dog who had become their guardian angel.